I was really astounded to find just this lost intellectual history on the border and in the place where I'm from. I was uncovering stories about, Mexican intellectuals and activists and poets and writers and journalists who were fleeing the Mexican Revolution, this authoritarian regime of Porfirio Diaz, and ending up in, downtown El Paso in these print shops and, and distributing these pamphlets and newspapers all across the border, the southern border of the United States, from California to South Texas, and then all the way down to Mexico.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Fox Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of The Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. You can find out more about us, including how to support our efforts, at our website, theprogressivesouth.org. In this week's interview, we'll be talking about El Paso, Texas, with reporter and author Jazmine Ulloa, who you heard up top. She's a native of El Paso and has just published a terrific book looking at her hometown's complex, multicultural past and present as one of the country's great border cities. That's coming up. And in our arts and culture segment, we'll take a look at an unusual museum in Little Rock, Arkansas, one of only 3 collections in the world dedicated to women's purses and handbags. And I just want to say up top that it is also allergy season here in East Tennessee. We're having our annual explosion of tree pollen, and so any hoarseness or phlegminess you detect in my voice can be attributed to that. All right, let's start with the news roundup. This week, more fascinating special elections, this time in Florida, the latest efforts to force the 10 Commandments into the South's public schools, and a couple of hateful anti-LGBTQ bills meet their demise in the Tennessee Legislature. As always, you can find links with sources and more information in the show notes. First to Florida, where, in what has become a familiar pattern over the past 6 months, Democrats flipped 2 Republican-held seats in special elections. The Florida Phoenix called it Florida Democrats', quote, biggest election night in years, unquote. The seat that got the most attention was State House District 87, where Democrat Emily Gregory, a first-time candidate with a background in public health, beat Republican John Maples by 51 to 49%. The district went for President Donald Trump by 10 points in 2024 and had been held by Republican Mike Caruso, who won it by 19 points that same year. Caruso is a close ally of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who rewarded him by appointing him to a county court clerk position last year, creating the vacancy that the special election was called to fill. But what's especially notable about the Palm Beach district isn't just that it voted for Trump, it's where he actually lives. His Mar-a-Lago estate, which has become essentially the Southern White House, is in the middle of it. Trump had endorsed Maples for the seat, and, for the record, he voted in the primary with a mail-in ballot, the kind he's trying to make harder for voters to use in his proposed Save America voting bill. Gregory, the surprise Democratic winner, told the Phoenix that as far as she's concerned, Trump is just one of her 180,000 constituents. The other flipped seat for State Senate District 14, which includes part of the Tampa area, was even closer. Another first-time Democratic candidate, Brian Nathan, a Navy veteran and union organizer, beat Republican State Representative Josie Tomkow by just 408 votes, winning by half a percentage point. The seat was also vacant because of a DeSantis appointment. He named its former incumbent, Republican Jay Collins, as his lieutenant governor last year. Tomkow, a Republican up-and-comer who's just 30 and was first elected to the state house when she was 22, raised a lot more money than Nathan and was heavily favored to win. Collins won the seat by 10 points in 2022, and Trump won it by 7 points in 2024. Both victories may be fleeting. The seats will both be on the ballot for full terms this November. But Democrats will be contesting them as incumbents rather than challengers. As signs of voter frustration, they add to a list of now 30 seats that Democrats have flipped in various state races across the country since the start of Trump's second term. And the majority of those have been in the South. 13 in Virginia's House of Delegates, 3 in Mississippi, 2 in Florida, and 1 each in Arkansas, Georgia, and Texas. And a new wave of laws mandating the posting of the Ten Commandments in public schools seems aimed to test those boundaries further. Not surprisingly, all of the laws passed to date are in the South, specifically in Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas. All are the subjects of ongoing litigation, even as other states consider similar proposals. Louisiana passed its law in 2024, requiring that posters of the Ten Commandments no smaller than 14 by 11 inches be displayed in every single public classroom in the state, from kindergarten through college. A federal judge issued a preliminary injunction blocking the law, but that injunction was lifted in February by the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, by reputation and track record the most conservative federal appeals court in the country. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry followed up the ruling with a letter to Louisiana's school superintendents directing them to display Ten Commandments posters, which were delivered to schools across the state. Landry said their cost was covered by donations, not public money. The state's Attorney General, Liz Murrill, approved 4 poster designs, which schools can choose from. They include not only the Ten Commandments, leading off with "I am the Lord thy God," but also references to American government past and present. The conceit is that by couching the biblical imperatives in a historical context, they are presented not as proselytizing and more as something like social studies content. But in reality, the posters very much appear as a full melding of church and state. One shows an image of Moses on one side of the Ten Commandments and a photo of House Speaker and Louisiana Congressman Mike Johnson on the other, under a banner that reads "The House of Representatives and the Lawgivers," explicitly equating American politicians with biblical figures. Another uses selective citations of a handful of Supreme Court decisions to create an impression that the court has always ruled in favor of public displays of religion, which grossly distorts the actual history of American jurisprudence. The story's different in Arkansas, so far at least. A federal judge on March 16th permanently blocked a 2025 law, Act 573, requiring the display of the Ten Commandments in classrooms. U.S. District Judge Timothy Brooks wrote, quote, "Act 573's purpose is only to display a sacred religious text in a prominent place in every public school classroom. And the only reason to display a sacred religious text in every classroom is to proselytize to children. The state has said the quiet part out loud," unquote. The state of Arkansas is appealing the ruling. Texas also passed a mandatory Ten Commandments law in 2025, and it has been partly blocked. Federal judges in 2 regions of the state have enjoined it from taking effect in their districts, while Attorney General Ken Paxton has directed schools in the rest of the state to abide by the law and display the commandments. The state's appealing the 2 injunctions, which will be heard by the same Fifth Circuit that already lifted the block on Louisiana's law. Other states considering Ten Commandments laws this year include Tennessee, where the state House and Senate have passed different versions, one making the display mandatory and the other making it optional. There are also active bills in Alabama and South Carolina. Speaking of Tennessee, there was a bit of good news here last week. 2 of the worst anti-LGBTQ bills filed in the state legislature this year appear to have stalled. One bill would have made it illegal for any state or local government agency, official, or employee to in any way observe or celebrate LGBTQ pride on public property. The No Pride Flag or Month Act would allow any private citizen to bring a lawsuit against a government agency or employee who displays an LGBTQ flag symbol anywhere on government property or in any visible way celebrates LGBTQ Pride Month. But it failed to advance in the Senate's State and Local Government Committee. The committee's 2 Democrats, Senators Sarah Kyle of Memphis and Jeff Yarborough of Nashville, both voted no, along with Republican Senator Paige Wally of Savannah. 3 other Republicans abstained from the vote, and only 3 voted in favor. Yarborough said the bill was an attack on the First Amendment and was trying to police the speech of every government official, agency, and employee in the state, as well as students, volunteers, or anyone else present on public property. He noted that the state doesn't prohibit the observance of any other day or month celebrating any other group, community, or culture. Here's a bit of what he had to say.
I would assume, like, if I've got a pride emblem on my coffee cup, I can't carry that around. If I've got if somebody was wearing a flag for pride, like, we're saying that that's not okay. I mean, there is no way to do this without just wildly overreaching on freedom of speech. And like I said, I mean, I think it's wrong and inappropriate to target this group, but it's wrong or inappropriate to target any group like this. Like, we have freedom of thought here in America. We have freedom of speech.
The failed vote means the bill won't move forward in the Senate, although there are various ways that bills can be revived. Another bill, HB 1473, says that no private person or organization, including businesses, is compelled to recognize same-sex marriages if they have religious objections to them. The actual impact of the bill seems murky, and its lead sponsor, Republican State Representative Gino Bolso, has been evasive about what he's trying to accomplish. But LGBTQ advocates are worried that, for example, it could give hospitals leeway to not allow spousal visitations or even medical decision-making by same-sex partners. Businesses could decide not to include same-sex couples in their family insurance plans. The bill passed the Tennessee House in February, but last Monday, the state Senate's Judiciary Committee deferred considering it and several other bills to 2027. So it also appears to be dead for the year, barring some unusual action to bring it back up. Okay, now we're to my conversation with Jazmine Ulloa. She's a reporter for the New York Times covering immigration issues nationwide. She previously worked for the Boston Globe and the Los Angeles Times. She was born and grew up in El Paso, Texas, a city that has always stood apart geographically at the far corner of West Texas and culturally because of its long and complex history. Ulloa has just published a terrific new book called El Paso, 5 Families and 100 Years of Blood, Migration, Race, and Memory. It was inspired partly by Ulloa's return to her hometown as a journalist to cover the aftermath of a terrible event, the 2019 massacre of 23 people at an El Paso Walmart. The gunman, a self-described white supremacist, told authorities that he drove to El Paso from Dallas because he wanted to fight the, quote, Hispanic invasion of Texas, unquote. Ulloa, who's Mexican-American herself, delves into the city's history to illustrate what a preposterous idea that is. There can't be a Hispanic invasion of Texas, and certainly not of El Paso, because Spanish-speaking residents of mixed cultural heritage have been there for centuries, long before it was part of the United States. In her book, Ulloa traces the stories of 5 families across multiple generations to illustrate the complexities, the traumas, and the resilience of the multicultural city. It's a deeply reported book full of resonant details that combines contemporary interviews with archival research, and it feels even more immediate and relevant today than it did when she started work on it in the wake of the Walmart shooting. I was really happy to get the chance to talk to her about it. So, Seth, let's go to the tape. All right, Jazmine Ulloa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
First, I want to say congratulations on the book. I just finished reading it, and it's terrific. It does such a good job of telling all these individual stories, these kind of multi-generational family stories, and then weaving those with so many great details into the whole history of El Paso over the last 150 years or so, and really then into the history of the United States and the history of Mexico. It's one of my favorite ways of storytelling, of kind of revealing this broad tapestry through all these individual threads. I saw that you just went back to El Paso last week for a book event. Looked like you had a good crowd there. I was curious, just to start with, how is it being received there? Because I guess it's one thing to kind of tell the rest of the world about your place, but when you have to go back to that place and also tell them about it, what are you hearing from people?
Oh my gosh, it's been incredible. It's been so beautiful to hear from so many people that I know and love and grew up with about how they're connecting with the book. And you know, there's so many readers who came up to me in El Paso to share stories about their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents, you know, traqueros, mineros, braceros, people who built the American Southwest and haven't really seen themselves represented in history and history books. And so it's just been, like I said, beautiful, but also bittersweet, you know, to to experience this and to experience it at a time when so many schools and universities are shuttering Mexican American and Latino studies courses and departments. It just takes on even greater significance.
Right, to put those stories out there. And I mean, you talk about it being bittersweet. The book itself obviously very much is, and it begins with the horrible massacre at the Walmart in 2019, which I know you flew home to cover. And that was obviously, like, covering anything like that is always very traumatic. I'm sure doubly so when it's in a place that you know and love. I guess that was obviously a difficult experience, but what was it about that made you want to actually go deeper into it and to kind of use that as a way to explore El Paso itself?
Yeah, so as I say in the book, I grew up, I was born and raised in El Paso. I went to high school 3 minutes from where this massacre happened. So I spent a lot of time out there, as I write in the book, just being a normal teenager with my friends. And it was a tragedy that affected people that I knew and loved. And I thought I had thick skin. I was a crime reporter. I started out as a crime reporter in Texas. So I was always, I tended to go out to these very rough and emotional scenes. So I thought I had thick skin, and not until that, it affected people that I knew and loved. My best friend's father was at the store that day and escaped just as the gunfire started. And I think at the same time, I was a national political reporter for the national political reporter for the Boston Globe. And we were already beginning, the 2020 presidential election cycle. And we were already beginning to see El Paso as this backdrop to these, to these national immigration battles. And some people were already calling it the new Ellis Island or the Ellis Island of the Southwest. But in this new Ellis Island, we were seeing migrants getting penned up under bridges and children getting separated at the border. So the images from my hometown were already very jarring even before that massacre happened. And so as I was there, I was kind of thinking about it more and more, thinking about this place where I'm from and how could I tell a different story, one that explores not just, this violent episode as a rupture in our history, but part of a much larger legacy, a much larger sordid legacy of racial violence.
Yeah. And so as you started working on it and started the research, I mentioned the different families that you kind of follow, and the story kind of the book accumulates more characters as it goes, because you kind of start with a couple of founding families and follow them, and then other people enter the narrative. How did you find those families? When did, as you were doing your work, when did you kind of start to identify, okay, this is a thread I can kind of follow through this part of the history?
Yeah, so I've been reporting on immigration in some form or another, even if I wasn't exactly an immigration reporter, right, for more than a decade. So some of the families I had met through that reporting, and then others I identified through the research, and they sort of found me in a way. And I was really trying to find families who were emblematic of that migratory experience through the Southwest, right, which was, we talk a lot about Ellis Island as this sacred, this place that symbolizes our most sacred ideals about welcoming the other, right? But it's really in El Paso where you can see where it's really El Paso that holds the key to understanding not only the nation's immigration battles and how they've shaped Latino identity, but American identity itself. And so I was really trying to capture that ebb and flow of largely Mexican and Latino workers who have crossed into the United States, either lured by economic opportunity or fleeing destabilized countries back home, fleeing war, poverty, tragedy back home, and then cast out during these nativist periods that have happened throughout different times in history. And I felt also like I was writing for really two different audiences, right? This national audience that tends to understand the place where I'm from through this lens of national security and the drug war, and trying to, broaden that audience's understanding of, this is actually a place that's really vibrant. There's more to the border than violence. There's culture, there's trade, there's this exchange of language and ideas. And it's actually a really exciting and fun place to grow up, right? And then I felt like I was also writing for fronterizos like myself, who already knew that culture and, had lived and breathed that binational culture, but was trying to expand our own understanding of the place where we're from, and to see that it's actually even more multiracial and more multi-ethnic than we even know it to be. So that's how I was trying to identify the families. And then if you want me to talk a little bit more, I could talk a little bit more about
Yeah, sure, of course.
the families. And then so the families themselves, like I said, I identified through through reporting and research, like the Rubio sisters, the Rubio sisters who were deported as children and then went on to become the first, sisters to serve in the California legislature. I had actually covered while I was a State House reporter in Sacramento for the Los Angeles Times. And this was a time when the Democratic leadership in California was establishing the state as this progressive base, right, of resistance to the first Trump administration. And there was this class of Latino lawmakers, a lot of them Mexican-American, who had grown up through this very nativist, anti-Mexican, anti-immigrant period in California in the 90s and had now gone on to serve in the State House. And one of the sisters, Blanca Rubio, was among them, and she was she was giving this really intense speech on the House floor, on the Assembly floor, when she name checked El Paso and Juarez. And so of course I grabbed her afterward. And if you're from El Paso, you know that the second question you ask someone when you realize they're from El Paso is where did you go to high school? So that's what I asked her, and then I found out she had actually gone to high school in California. So, but
yeah, no, I well, because I wasn't familiar with them, not knowing the California legislature well, it was kind of a revelation to me in the book when they emerge as that at the end, because you kind of follow, the modest and the modest beginnings and struggles of their family back and forth across the border through so many generations, and to have them end up there, it was notable.
Yeah. And then, for example, like Erlinda Wang Chu, I had grown up with, growing up, I had seen photos of this woman who's dressed as a soldadera, right, a female combatant of the Mexican Revolution, and she's got long jet black hair, and she's wearing a bandolier, these bullets, these belts of bullets across her chest, and like I said, growing up, I had seen that photo and had thought she was a Yaqui indigenous woman, and she's identified as such in a lot of photos and a lot of in some of the archives. But as I started doing more research, I came to find that she was actually a China Mexicana, and I just got really, really curious about that and trying to find her descendants, and I came to find that they were that they were still alive, that they were alive, and not only that they were prominent judges and immigration lawyers, and that they had been shaped by their grandmother. And one of them actually had a direct tie right back to the shooting, but I won't spoil that one.
Yeah. And, that then you use that to really illuminate the role and the presence of Asian people all through the 19th and 20th centuries there. And so, one thing that I guess is kind of obvious reading through the book is just the repeated cycles that we see happen of times of sort of surges of people across the border from the South for economic reasons, because they're refugees from one thing or another. And then periods of reaction in the United States where there's a big push to push people back and to block off that entry. You were probably already aware of, some of the pillars of that history as you went into this. But did anything that you find there, like what were the revelations, I guess, for you? Or was it just coming to a deeper understanding of how cyclical those kinds of things are?
Yeah, I feel like I had a vague understanding of how cyclical it was when I went into it, but how sweeping it is, and just how much of what we're seeing today we've seen before has really hit me, especially as, I was working on this book through the Biden years, as attitudes were drastically shifting on immigration. So I wasn't, a lot of people ask me about the Trump administration today, and how that's changed. But really, I was trying to show how this deportation and detention apparatus had been built through time, through through Republican and Democratic administrations, and just how frustrated Latinos and Americans are with the system, and why. So yeah, I think the sweeping nature of it has been a revelation. I think the other revelation to me was, as reporters and as political reporters, we report a lot on the distrust, this erosion of trust in institutions and scholars and expertise among general voters, or among the American public, right? Everyday American voters. And we tend to attribute that, as to this, anti-intellectual movement, that, a lot of these things are coming from elites, Western elites, these ideas about equality and, fair work wages and all of that. But there, I was really astounded to find just this lost intellectual history on the border and in the place where I'm from. I was uncovering stories about, Mexican intellectuals and activists and poets and writers and journalists who were fleeing the Mexican Revolution, this authoritarian regime of Porfirio Diaz, and ending up in, downtown El Paso in these print shops and and distributing these pamphlets and newspapers all across the border, the southern border of the United States, from California to South Texas, and then all the way down to Mexico. And I thought that was pretty powerful, because a lot of these newspapers were getting distributed not by elites, but by workers, by blue collar workers, some of them whom couldn't read, and would get others who could read to read it at whether it was in mines or in construction sites to read the paper to the masses, right? And so I thought that was a pretty powerful lost history about how Mexicans have been labeled dangerous, not only because some were actually running guns down for the Mexican Revolution, but because they had these big, bold ideas that we're still debating today, whether it's, to stop discrimination against Mexican workers, to promote fair wages and hours. So I thought that was a really fascinating facet to uncover.
Yeah, and that there's this continual struggle on both sides of the border, right, for workers' rights and for, like, workers have been exploited both in Mexico and the United States for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So I guess, you are now covering immigration issues for the New York Times. How has what you've learned working on this book and the work that you've done in it informed and affected the work that you're doing on a daily basis now? Yeah,
I think it's I just keep going back to the historical record. It's like I keep saying, we've been here before. I've been covering the crackdowns in Minneapolis and Chicago and DC, Los Angeles, and a lot of what we're seeing, these military style surveillance, these military style techniques, whether they're raids, sweeps, surveillance, operations that are entangling American citizens as well as undocumented residents, that are threatening the rights of civilian observers, and even just neighbors coming out in their pajamas to record what's happening because they're so concerned about the actions of officers on the streets. If you look at the historical record throughout, and as I show throughout the book, a lot of these scenes played out in the 30s and the 50s, in the very operation that President Trump named as a model for his mass deportation campaign, right? Operation Wetback, which was named after a racial slur. So I think I've just been thinking a lot about how these aggressive tactics that we're seeing now originated in communities like the one where I'm from, and in many ways went unchecked in communities where I'm from. And I'm wondering now what will it mean for the future? How much will Americans stand now that we're seeing those same agencies and operations playing out in the American heartland? And what I'm hearing from scholars and historians and even, law enforcement officers, federal immigration officers, former and current, is just a lot of concern. And I'm actually even hearing a little bit of optimism that now that more people are seeing how dangerous these actions can be when they are unchecked, when they are not reined in, that it'll push people to demand greater accountability.
Right. You had an essay, I think you just published a week ago or so that I think the headline was from El Paso to Minneapolis. Every city is now a border city. And, I was thinking about that, like with Minneapolis. Obviously it's true in the sense that you mean it in terms of this massive surge of enforcement. But it's also true that Minneapolis, part of the reason the enforcement's there is that even Minneapolis is now this very multicultural city with all these people and influences from around the world. And I was wondering, I know, I guess there's always a tendency to want to look for, well, what's the good that we can see from like this story that you've told, which is full of violence, and hatred, and bigotries and exploitation. But also has its moments of joy and its scenes of all the family, gathering at the grandparents' houses and things like that. Having grown up in El Paso, we may make too much of people's resilience, because resilience can kind of be a cover. Like, why do people have to be resilient? We shouldn't have to be resilient through these things. But I guess having been steeped in such a multicultural, multilingual, multinational place, what do you take from that is positive, that's good, that is maybe sort of like the best of that American dream?
Yeah, I know people are hesitant to talk about resilience, but that is what it is, and we shouldn't let people take that away from us. Like, it is, people are resilient. And I think that that's what's given me strength in my own work. Like I said, having parents and grandparents, friends talk about their parents and their grandparents and the things they went through, and they're still here and they're thriving. And even the people in my book, to see these sisters become lawmakers, to see that, the Chu's families are prominent immigration judges and lawyers, like that is such a sign of strength. And I'm sorry, I lost the question. What was the
Well, just kind of, yeah, I guess what is because you can look at the history of a place like El Paso and say, well, we're just doing the same thing over and over again. And every time there's another economic crisis or something else, we're going to see these, racial divisions and crackdowns and so forth. But what's being built in the spaces in between, I guess, like.
Yeah. And that's what I was really trying to balance that through the book, right? Throughout the book, because I didn't want it just to be another story about the violence at the border, the bloodshed at the border. And I've said this before, like, I wanted it to be about a different kind of blood, like blood that binds, blood that ties families across time and distance, across generations. And that to me is a very, very powerful symbol to me. And so I think, as I was capturing all the bigotries and the nativism, how nativism hasn't been exceptional, but integral to how we've enforced, how we've crafted and enforced immigration policy against largely Latino and Mexican American workers in this country. I wanted to show that there has also been this resistance to it, this pushback to that type of thinking, and what I call in the book like la conciencia colectiva, right? This work, this ethic about caring for your neighbors and caring for the collective good, and that you can find wells and wells of it in El Paso, in places like El Paso and Minneapolis.
So to wrap up, I wanted to kind of advance the story past the end of the book, because obviously, like, you had to stop writing at a certain point, but things were continuing to happen even as you were finishing it. And El Paso remains central in a lot of ways. Multiple immigrants have died in detention at Camp Montana there at Fort Bliss. ICE is proposing to put a giant new detention warehouse center outside of the city. how are people responding to those things, to that kind of the new manifestation of this regime kind of happening right in their backyard?
As the same as they always have, right? So with anger and outrage, but also some with division, right? That you see both of those forces playing out in the city, and we're going to continue to see it play out in that city in the United States, in El Paso and across the United States for years to come. But I guess what I was trying to really show with the book is that, as I said, it's in El Paso where you can see it's in El Paso where there's just so many lessons for how we think about this debate moving forward, where you can see how these laws have been, how these immigration laws have been crafted against blue collar workers. So many are now declaring as outsiders, criminals, and invaders, and how far from the truth that is, because it's in El Paso where you understand that there is no Latino invasion of the United States. Mexican American culture and history have always been part of who we are as Americans. All right. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. So thanks so much for your time. Thanks for the book. It's excellent, and I highly recommend it to everybody. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
We're in the last few days of Women's History Month, which makes it a good time to talk about ESSE. That's ESSE, the Latin verb for to be. It's the name of an unusual museum in Little Rock, Arkansas, dedicated to the history of women's purses, with a particular emphasis on the evolution of the purse in 20th century America, when it evolved to meet the evolving needs of American women. The museum opened in 2013 as the brainchild and passion project of Anita Davis, a local resident who had over the years accumulated a large personal collection of purses. In the early 2000s, she was part of a group who put together a traveling exhibition on the history of American purses, which was displayed in places across the country. When its touring was over, Davis wanted to give it a permanent home. She had also become involved in buying and restoring historic buildings in downtown Little Rock, along the way helping to revitalize a whole commercial district, and she turned one of those buildings into ESSE. In a 2016 interview, she said, "It was kind of my way of honoring women. There just aren't a lot of things in this country that honor women." ESSE takes purses seriously, not only as fashion items and accessories, but as crucial vessels that women use to carry their most necessary items. Its permanent exhibit displays handbags from each decade of the 20th century, alongside period-specific collections of the things that they would have carried. It's one of only 3 purse museums in the world, and the only one in North America, the only one dedicated to American women's history. So anytime you're in or around Little Rock, whatever month it is, it's very much worth a visit. And yes, make sure to check out the museum shop, where you can find an array of handbags and also some jewelry and personal items to carry in them. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit enterprise, and you can find information about supporting us on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. You can also reach out to me directly at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. Thanks to our friends in Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. We'll talk to you soon.